All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to the final session of MVJ's Entrepreneurial Journalism Workshop. Today, we have Professor Paul Szoldra from the King's College and the Media Project. He's here to talk tips on creating and leading your own journalism publication. Professor Szoldra, you can go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Devin. Glad to be with you all. I'm going to get my screen share going here, and we will start up.
Awesome.
Pardon the pun. So I think this is a great topic. Let's see here. Can you see? Let me just resume share. It didn't seem to go. Let me share this again one more time.
No worries.
Okay, there we go. So this is a great topic. I'm really glad MVJ is talking about entrepreneurship because so much is changing in the world of media, and there's so many opportunities for journalists to do journalism on their own or with organizations. So what I'm going to do is give you some overview thoughts that I've learned doing and teaching journalism in, learning and teaching, doing entrepreneurship within journalism world. And then we'll lead to some Q&A. Can also give a case study of a project I've been working on. And I'm happy to hear pitches from anybody on this call as well. I'd love to hear what you're working on. So this is I teach a class on entrepreneurial journalism to undergrads every semester at the King's College where I work, because I believe it's important we build the concept of building audience and building revenue, being a solution maker in journalism for anybody I'm training to go into journalism. So over the course of the semester, we try to also teach students where the industry's come from, where it is now, and help them figure out where it's going. So just to give you a quick history of that sets our minds in the right place today, where has journalism come from? When we think back to ancient Greece, people informing one another verbally, we go back as far, a couple thousand years ago, people informing each other with tales, telling stories that inform people's worlds. And even then, until any tribal group we see now, still cultural anthropologists see that news is a primary human need. People need to share information about, local news, essentially, how the hunting was in one place, or how the event was or feast was somewhere else. So again, news is a vital human need. And people migrated, of course, from the verbal tradition to writing things down on paper when we got paper. And I'm borrowing from a couple people's journalism histories. One is Dan Gilmore at Arizona State. Another one was on the media host from NPR when I heard him speak once. So we go from paper, we go to Gutenberg, to media 1.0. All of a sudden we had mass production and distribution with movable type of printed products, and you didn't have to scrawl everything by hand. So that was pretty revolutionary. And people, of course, at this era started printing and distributing leaflets in many places, and journalism was starting to be born in that era. And then we go to the telegraph as a major technology leap forward that sent information faster than a horse can run across the ocean, across the country, between cities. And then, the newspaper really developed and evolved in, the US in particular, also in Europe, but New York, you had dozens of publications emerging as the penny press and battling for audience. And a lot of standards and ethics around journalism developed in the last couple of centuries in the newspaper industry. And a lot of scholars like Paul Szoldra, I believe he won a Pulitzer, and he's a historian at Princeton, who's done some great books like The History of the Creation of the Media. I like this quote when he talked about it wasn't just about the tech of newspapers, it was about the meaning of newspapers. And he said, more than any other medium, the newspapers have been our eyes on the state, our check on private abuses, our civic alarm system. So really a fundamental role in our societies. Then, the numbers here, if we go from 1.9 to 2.0, these rounder numbers signify super important tech changes. And so the advent of radio and TV, the broadcast mediums, was a big leap forward. But a much bigger leap forward was the internet technology that we all know. And I'm not going to go so far in depth on all of this because we know how it changed everything we know about production and distribution of journalistic content, and involving anybody who can be a journalist, which creates entrepreneurship possibilities for all of us. But it also creates a lot more questions. We've had this explosion of quantity. If everyone can have a Twitter feed and do journalism in some way, shape, or form, but questions around quality and standards and ethics, of course, and who can and will build larger audiences. And it also, just as one indication, one exercise that's kind of fun to do with the students is to walk through various platforms or products and say, is this journalism? Is the New York Times journalism? Or is BBC journalism? Is BuzzFeed journalism? Is Medium journalism? Is Twitter journalism? YouTube, etc. I mean, just to keep this moving forward, typically what we end up talking about is, well, some things are platforms which journalism can be produced or distributed through, but there's a difference between, what is a journalistic entity and what is a platform for any kind of content flowing. So one thing a main thing I hope you all think about, anyone who watches the video or is on our webinar today, is there's really two zones of entrepreneurship that we really need in journalism. One is news content startups. So a news organization that's completely starts up as a nonprofit or a for-profit. We could certainly talk in the Q&A what those look like, some tips on, on how to develop those. I saw some of the other speakers in this series are specialists on some of that kind on local news startups, et cetera. So I imagine they've covered that topic quite well. I'm happy to talk as well on that, but that's certainly a zone we need more, always, and better quality content startups. But I think the other thing to think about is we also need tech. We need news tech as a category for startups and companies that are creating technology that's useful to the news industry, useful to citizens, that helps our media ecology, helps create better quality of information structures. Okay, and those two could involve many of the hot button words in startup land, whether it's mobile web, of course, we all use mobile web now, but AI, drones, bots, crowdsourcing, social media, voice recognition, transcription. We could list on and on. So it's a good habit to learn to be aware of new technologies and trends coming around, and how do they fit or work with journalism? Can they fit or work with journalism? We need people who are specialists in these technologies to come to our conversations and help us think through how some of these tech categories could work with journalism. All right, another part two here, that if I'm just doing an overview about entrepreneurship, is like we just went through the past, now we arrive at the current state of the news media. I think many of you already know this, so we're going to go through this quite quickly. But Walter Lippmann, another scholar and writer, he said there was this poetic and importance, sensibility around newspapers in particular, and he described it like this: the news of the day as it reaches the newspaper office is an incredible medley of fact, propaganda, rumor, suspicion, clues, hopes, and fears, and the task of selecting and ordering that news is one of the truly sacred and priestly offices in a democracy. For the newspaper is, in all literalness, the Bible of democracy, the book out of which a people determines its conduct. It is the only serious book that most people read. It is the only book they read every day. And this really captures, I think, a lot of things that was special about newspapers. And it also raises questions for me, which is, does the medley of fact, propaganda, rumor, suspicion, clues, hopes, and fears still arrive at the newspaper office? Where does it arrive, and how does it get sorted and selected and ordered? And is it happening in a way that's as good as previous decades? It's really interesting questions. We know what's happened to the newspapers. The employment's gone down. Circulation has gone down for most publications, although it's gone up for national, international publications that have been working on subscription revenue models, like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. There's been a a noticeable shift from advertising revenue to subscription revenue. We know that historically, people who bought and read newspapers regularly tended to be higher income levels, which was just kind of interesting. Is there a correlation there? Is there causation there? It's worth thinking about. And we know that older people tend to read more newspapers. So these two charts kind of make me think, hey, if people are not reading newspapers as much, but wealthier and older people are, is there some kind of inequality? Are there interesting effects or unintended consequences from that kind of a shift? We talked about earlier how revenue is shifting more to subscriptions or circulation, but you see what happened to advertising. The red line used to be the big driver of revenue, and it's really come down. And this is an interesting point, I think, for a lot of you who are thinking about starting any kind of news startup, nonprofit or for-profit. I think it's much harder to bank on advertising now as stable revenue that could support a full-time employee, for example. I think increasingly you have to think about subscription revenue as a primary driver, and advertising almost like gravy if you're going to have advertising. The more ads are coming from digital rather than print ads, obviously, but they don't pay as well to news outlets. That's why. And we see another challenge is the generational gap that boomers are still, and some Gen X, I guess, are still reading news in the paper and watching TV, whereas the younger generations are getting more through social media and not using their traditional format. So legacy media have the dilemma of how do we serve both audiences? We got to be on all these platforms. Whereas new media that some of you may start can, you have a little bit of a luxury to figure out how to maybe start mobile first, digital first, and whether you need to print products at all or be on terrestrial TV or radio at all. The social media giants, of course, have been gobbling up greater portions of the ad revenue. And again, that's why we've seen a decrease in the ad revenue that supports news. I'm going to skip a couple slides here. Some positive trends: podcast listening is on the rise, as you know. The economics of podcast boom are shifting a lot, and so it is indeed, it's hard to figure out how to make money sometimes with podcasts, but it's a good place to be experimenting and developing. All right, so with those two things as a backdrop, now let's start to talk about the future. What is entrepreneurial journalism? Entrepreneur, a person who operates a business, taking on greater than normal financial risks to do so. Okay, they're typically someone who's starting something new and taking some risks. Entrepreneurship involves a lot of things, but for one thing, it's not as easy. It's actually really hard because you're dealing with sometimes with ambiguous markets, totally new ideas. It's easy to get distracted when you're starting something new and don't have a roadmap. It's like, imagine trying to put together a complicated IKEA product with no map, right? It's like that sometimes. It's moving often, you're moving often very fast without a lot of resources like you would have in the military or in a big company. Although, hey, sometimes in the military, I'm sure you operate in some circumstances where you have to be super resourceful as well, and you don't have all the resources right in front of you or with you. And that's what entrepreneurship's like, figuring out how to almost MacGyver things a lot of times, how to do things without money or without full-time employees sometimes. Also, when you start something as an entrepreneur, you can't really blame others. It's on you because you're the founder. So you have to own everything you do as an entrepreneur. A lot of entrepreneurs quickly learn, therefore, they need to collaborate, they need to partner and figure out how to do that skillfully. They have to continually innovate, not innovating on just the first thing they build, but continually testing, measuring, figuring out what works, and innovating their own product and solution. And again, you're taking on a ton of risk when you're being an entrepreneur. Your time, your money, other people's time and money. Okay, so a book that maybe some of you have heard of, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, is a book a lot of people go to explain what is lean methodology. And I found there's a lot of books that explain the same thing. Stephen Blank's books. There's several people. One could argue one book is better than the others, but they're the same idea is always present here. Of you're basically trying to figure out what's the market and who wants the product or a product, and doing research to figure out what is the market, and do I have a product that could fit that market, and then what does the product do for these people who have some kind of need or want such a product? What kind of features, functions, look, feel, what do they want? And so that's in short what you're doing. And then the lean startup methodology for doing that looks like this. So you start with the idea. You have an idea of something you're going to build. A new startup to cover the special forces community, let's say, because Stars and Stripes isn't doing enough there. I'm just hypothesizing here. So then you could go today and go launch something. If you've got the sources, you have the journalists, you can launch something on Substack if you want, or a variety of other newsletter platforms, Clubhouse audio platforms, CMS platforms. But basically you build it, you launch it with some thought, with some ideas, with some research, and you have your product. And then the key though for lean startup methodologies, you don't just stop there. When you have that product, you're trying to get more feedback. You're trying to get more insights from customers, from users, from data, and measure what the product is doing, how it's resonating with the audience. Are people willing to pay for this product, and why? And that data leads you to learn, and that leads you back to reiterate, either to maybe to scrap the first thing and build something new and go on a whole different platform, or maybe it's to adjust some of the features or some of the way you're doing journalism. But that just cycle tends to keep going. And that's the lean startup methodology in one graphic. If we had time and we were in person, I would have these cards and we would do this game that's a lot of fun, where you have to iterate and come up with ideas quickly. I was trying to figure out if there's a way we could do it in this setting, and I really could not figure out a way to do that, especially a way to record it where others might enjoy it. So we're going to keep on moving.
One of the downfalls of virtual, right?
Yeah, I've gotten a lot. I've taught so many classes now on Zoom, so I do know some ways to develop engagement and collaboration, but it's not always working with all groups. So let's see. So a couple case studies. This is Jonah Peretti, founder of BuzzFeed, and he helped start HuffPost, and he had kind of a knack for internet buzz. And he did an experiment with some Nike tennis shoe, and it went viral. And so he kind of started BuzzFeed as this place for viral content. And then later they iterated. They realized, hey, we need to be a respectable news org, and they bolted on BuzzFeed News. And I think they won a Pulitzer, if I recall. So they've done some interesting journalism. And but he's a good example of someone who has an idea, follows it, develops it, puts it online, maybe even before it's ready, fixes what's broken, and repeats. A different kind of model. I mean, BuzzFeed has gone public and it was a huge news startup, but sometimes startups don't have to be huge. Sometimes you can identify a niche, like that one we mentioned earlier, like a special forces publication for that audience. Or the picture here is of Rafat Ali, who started paidcontent.org, which he sold to The Guardian. That was a niche, highly targeted site based on, in the early and mid 2000s, it was focused on how do we get people to pay for content, which seems almost too niche. In fact, I think he had some professors at Columbia J School who told him it was too niche, but he really executed well, and it became a must read for people working in the media business in New York City. He had conferences, he had white paper, he got people to pay for stuff. And he sold it, I think, for 30 million, as I recall, to The Guardian. And that allowed him to go launch his next startup called Skift, which is also kind of a trade publication in the travel industry. And so, look, if you're trying to create a startup that is going to make a 10 times return or 1,000 times return, that's where you might be able, that's a big scalable business. That's something where you might be able to get Silicon Valley investors interested in you. And we could talk, if you're interested in that, on the VC world a bit and how that works. But, VC investors, if it doesn't have an ambition, if a startup doesn't have that kind of ambition, they call your business a lifestyle business, or more of like a little cottage mom and pop business. But I want to say that that's okay. Either model is really okay. And doing what Rafat Ali did, that's essentially a lifestyle business. He made a nice return for himself. But local news publishers all around the country are finding ways to employ 1, 2, 3 journalists, cover the news in their location, and that's really honorable. So not all startups, not all entrepreneurs need to be going for this Silicon Valley 10,000 x return or 10x return. And Jeff Jarvis is another person at CUNY in New York who teaches entrepreneurial journalism to grad students, and he's advocated for teaching students to start stuff on a small scale. And I believe in that. Teaching anybody new or in journalism to be a solution-oriented, startup-oriented person inside a company, or starting, if they have a day job and want to start something on the side, if they're not working for a news publisher already that allows it, that if they're a professor somewhere, or if they're a have a job that allows them to be a news entrepreneur, that's awesome. Maybe we can help save and further journalism with 5,000 or 1 million small businesses rather than 50 big ones. It's a good point that he makes. Folks who try to go the big content route and look for big money, we call companies like that unicorns. I mean, BuzzFeed is trying to be, a unicorn. We can explain what a unicorn is if you're interested. I show students just how the stock market changed in the last 20 years, where you used to have a diversified set of companies as the top 5 companies on the US stock exchanges, but now you have pretty much all tech companies, and they're massively bigger than other companies, like $1-2 trillion. This slide is of course 2016, but an updated one shows you that way over $1 trillion now for some of the largest companies, and they really dominate the economy and the market. A lot of the venture capital funding, if you're looking for funding for your startup from outside, a lot of the VC firms are based on the coasts in major cities. There's been a nice effort to try to find companies and develop VC funding in more of the middle of the country, which I think is really important. JD Vance, the hillbilly elegy writer, that was something he was advocating for at one point, I know. But you can't escape the fact that there's a lot of accelerators, a lot of VCs on the coasts, and so there's ways to access those. I'm happy to talk about that, but you kind of have to be willing to network in those locations sometimes if you want to be an entrepreneur. Why? Well, I mean, it's just, you can't. This is a diagram that shows what we call the PayPal Mafia. This effect of, in technology, success begets success. And I mean, I'm fortunate to, and kind of thrilled that I've had a few friends who, have gone and launched tech companies and sold them for even small exits. But as soon as they have a successful exit, they become more of a guru and able to invest in other companies. And so you look at a company like PayPal, and you have Peter Thiel, who's gone on to invest in Facebook after that, and was a co-founder of Palantir. And you had in that same group of founders, Reid Hoffman, who started LinkedIn, Elon Musk, who started Tesla and SpaceX and other stuff, as you know, some of the folks who started YouTube and Yelp, and other companies. And so this mafia of they're able to create many more successful companies through funding, through mentorship, et cetera. And it's one reason we need, more diverse founders. Obviously, all these are guys, a lot of mostly white and Asian guys. So I want to acknowledge that I think Silicon Valley even recognizes that groups of startup founders need to consciously look for diversity, people from different backgrounds, different genders, and military backgrounds. Since this is with MVJ, I mean, military background's super important. And I want to say, there's a lot of times when I'm, entering startup contests, applying for different I don't know, accelerators and stuff, and they often ask, the questions about diversity, including, are you a military veteran? And I'm glad they ask that. It's worth putting that, noting that in your materials, as I hope many of you already know. And I'm glad that funders are interested in that question. US is, huge place for VC funding. Europe and China are second and third. Some countries, Israel, Sweden, and others, box really above their weights. And the boom of tech startups in the US is definitely flourishing in many other parts of the world too. So the book that I use to teach undergrads about entrepreneurial journalism is by Mark Briggs. Grab it right here. It's a small little thin little book. I think Poynter Institute helped incubate that book, and it's useful. And Mark Briggs has 6 steps to go from idea to product. So if you're going to launch a news-related startup, you want to research it, figure out what the market is, what the landscape is. Steve Blank has lots of good advice and some videos you can watch. He talks about get the hell out of the building. It's often when you launch something, the best way to find out if there's a market for it, there's a need, is to go talk to people. And there's a certain way of talking to people to try to get them not just to parrot back what you want them to hear, but for you to get honest insights, honest feedback. So again, back to that example of, I'm sure there's, by the way, many publications that, cover the special forces community in some way. But if you were doing a startup on that, obviously you'd want to talk to people in that community, past and present, figure out what's interesting to them, what their needs are. That will definitely feed into how you develop a product. And the key that Blank talks about is open-ended questions. How do you solve this problem? Or how do you know, how do you learn about this or that? What do you like about XYZ publications? Or what do you read to stay informed? And then these open-ended questions give you a lot of the inputs that will help you. You could also buy Facebook ads if you want. I tell students, sometimes you want to talk to people who are your direct target customers, but sometimes it's also good, depending on what you're launching, to talk to random people, on the subway or in a coffee shop, about their news habits, their news needs. And for some reason, those kinds of conversations help open your eyes to the consumer in the market. Okay, after you've got those initial customer insights and research bases covered, you start to organize and define what it is, what is the it that you're planning to build. And you might create a document that maps the customer insights you gained. And then you start to craft the it. And I think the book that I referenced talks about JFK in 1961, that he said, we'd land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. And then we did that in 1969. And now we call that a moonshot. And Google has this concept of moonshots internally. And trying to craft the thing that you're building, often the more simple, concrete, credible it is, the more you have stories of people or emotions connected to it. That's super helpful. Great companies have slogans like no ands, but they have something they do. Eat fresh from Subway. What about good to the last drop? I'm curious sometimes how many undergrads know that's the slogan for a coffee company, and every once in a while one of them does. So all of the thoughts on product, marketing, all that stuff, you want to craft it into the thing that you're building. And then you want to start to prototype it. Do some drawings on paper, or use software like Balsamiq, and you can make mock-ups like this, what it looks like. The key is to build as little as possible, as quickly as possible. You might use cardboard, pipe cleaners, stuff like that too, depending on if it's a physical product or a digital app. And then back to that, remember that diagram of the lean startup methodology? Figure out how you can test it. Can you get your minimum viable product out there somehow? Can you see if people start buying it, if it's a product that's sellable? Or can you get people to react to it? But can you figure out ways you can test it? And so a lot of entrepreneurship classes spend a lot of time in this zone. of, let's build this thing, and then how do we get it? How do we test it? Or can we build it in a way that it's easy to test? I had there's one guy who's a specialist on this topic and has bought and sold, or created and sold a couple companies and worked at Google. His name's Alberto Savoia. I certainly recommend you check out his videos. He calls himself a failure guru, or he's obsessed with failure and failing fast. And so he and I wrote a piece about him once, and he was saying, Paul, maybe we could, you could learn my concepts here by trying to use them. And he asked me for startup ideas. So I told him I owned a domain name at the time for a skateboard brand called Dissident Skateboards. And so he wanted me to, he says, okay, the fast way you would test that concept, the idea was to create dissident skateboards with like images of political dissidents, and to create an educational product around the skateboard deck that could, that parents might buy for their kids to help them learn about dissidents. And anyway, so I've not done anything with that concept, but he liked it. He was intrigued, and he said, is there a way you could make a poster and put it up around your college and see how many people ordered it just from that kind of mock-up? Or could you buy a Google ad, do the design, put a Google ad out there, and see how many people ordered it? So that's the way testing it might work in that in that universe. And then again, once you get the feedback, results from your test, you can adapt the product, and you can and should always adapt your product. We see huge pivots in major companies. If you listen to Guy Raz show, How I Built It, or How I Built This, there's great stories, interviews with entrepreneurs of how the thing they created wasn't the thing they set out to create, but they were aware of insights and how customers use the product and where the needs were, and sometimes would pivot. So Instagram was an example of that. Flickr was an example of that. As I understand it, started as a married couple, saw how people were sharing photos over video game consoles, and that led them to create Flickr. Okay. So some lessons, some keys to success for starting news-related startups, information-related startups is, again, paying attention to big themes, emerging tech ideas is pretty key, I think. Executing well. It's easy to come up with that initial idea, but actually executing is everything. I like one Alberto Savoia's phrase that I like was innovate like a startup, go to market like an adult. And the best entrepreneurs solve problems. They do a job for people. And so how does your idea fulfill people's needs? How does it do a job for them? How can you make something that people want, not just something that you think's cool, right? That's a big key for new startups. All right. We're just about at the end here for my overview, and I'm happy to take some questions before I show you, after we hear some questions, then I can show you a case study of something I built. But I'll leave this slide up. If we don't have questions, we could play a little game here and maybe hear some pitches. Okay, so I'll turn it back over to Devin to see what you guys would like to do next.
I did just go ahead and enable everybody's mic functions. You guys should be able to talk as you'd like.
Hey guys, this is Karan. Hi y'all.
Hey, Karan.
Hey. So my question to you is, what has been your biggest land in this? We're talking about entrepreneurship. So what defines your success in entrepreneurship in this space?
That's great. I think there's many things that can define your success, and maybe each entrepreneur has a different measure of success. So I'll tell you mine. Okay, and what I mean by different measures, one could be like you had an exit, you built something and made a certain amount of money by selling your company. That's a typical one, I think, for Silicon Valley or startups. Another one is how much money you raised in a venture round, I think, in a round A or B or C. But I think for me, I think I'm really interested in the idea of, I mean, I think journalism startups, we care about the common good, public interest, um, social good. And I think also I like the entrepreneurial zones that care about social entrepreneurship. And so for me, I think I'm more driven, I think it's good to be driven by money, but I think I'm a little less driven by money and a little more driven by, have I made a difference with the startup for the common good? Have I created a better quality of information or media ecology that's good for citizens? And so how do I measure it? That's the real question, Karan. So I'll show you the project I'm working on next. Well, the one cool thing, okay, so I've got a couple projects I'm working on. One is I'm an executive director of a nonprofit called the Media Project that does training in different parts of the world for journalists. And I feel like we've created, so I can measure how many people, we have 5 international programs each year that train, probably 200 to 300 journalists or have programs for them. So we can measure that. And we also have a nonprofit news outlet on the topic of religion, because the Media Project, there's so many great nonprofits that do journalism training around the world. Ours, the kind of niche that we help on is the question of how do we help journalists, and how do we as journalists cover religion well, and how do we recognize that religion is important to a lot of people, and how do we cover it in a way that's not always in a pluralistic world, but also in a way that's treating the topic as important. So we started our own nonprofit news outlet called religionunplugged.com, where we can publish journalism from all around the world, because we have all these members, 2,000, 3,000 members. So with that publication, we launched in 2019. So how would I measure the success of religionunplugged.com? Well, I can measure it through traffic. And so now we're up to, last year we had 1 million clicks on our stories, which was, basically it's grown by double or triple every year since we launched in 2019, which is awesome. And the same, we can measure followers and we can measure our audience. So that's one way to measure new startups. We can also measure the quality of journalism, perhaps by the awards that we've won, like a dozen awards from a variety of different associations. So I'd measure it that way. But as a nonprofit outlet, we're not trying to monetize that one right now. We're trying to grow it. And so, so I think the other way to measure success, I'll save my other answer, I think, for Vet News, the other project I'm working on, when I show you that one. But I think in that one, I would measure it by, am I changing a norm in the industry, and am I providing a tool that some news organizations are using? And yes, we have 20 news organizations using that tool. I think it's helping to change norms of how news outlets engage with readers, and manage feedback. And I do believe it creates efficiency and saves costs, and it's something newsrooms will be willing to pay for. So it's a really good question, Karan. And I think it's trying to measure success, figuring out what the target is, what the success looks like, is really important. That's why it's such a good question. Because if you're just launching something for fun, that's fine, but you may not have an objective of where you're trying to go. And I think all of you, if you've been in the military, and I have family in the military, which is one reason I really appreciate the work MVJ is doing. I mean, I think military people are always mindful of objectives, right, in the mission and what you're trying to accomplish. And so that's why it's a good question.
And thank you so much for that, because I know that right now, the workplace, the job market, I'll say, is volatile. And there's so many people who can't find their way through, but really believe in what we do, and don't have a space to do it. And entrepreneurship is one of those areas where we can expand and grow, and not only define our own personal brands, but also expand the brands of the networks and the entities that we work for. So thank you so much for answering that question.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you're so right. I mean, if you're good at writing newsletters, like I have alums, students who I've seen really rise at organizations because they were good at running a newsletter for a newspaper or a magazine, or they're really good at managing social media. And sometimes they do that for a while, get some promotions, and then, you know, become a senior writer or a reporter. So it's, I think you're right. These learning skills to build audience or be entrepreneurial sometimes can help you rise within an org or else or on your own, either way.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions? Okay, if not, I do have one. So what are your tips for entrepreneurs as they try to stay in touch with their audiences? I know you talked about doing the research is a big deal, but how do they stay in touch?
Yeah. I wonder if this is a good segue to show you what I've been working on because okay, so I'll give an answer that I think best practices like at, you know, O&A spends a lot of time on, we hear these terms like listening to our audience. Well, how do we do that? Maybe there's some tech we can use, but as a concept, I actually find it it's kind of hard. I mean, you, the journalist, can always be listening to feedback on your social media platforms, ignoring the trolls and the nasty folks, but listening to those who have substantive things to say. You can listen to your sources, but it, you know, often for the news outlet itself, one person or a small team of people are managing all these social channels and content out there. And the goal is really to get people to click and to read this stuff. So how do you listen to those people out there? I think some newsrooms like ProPublica are doing really some innovative stuff, you know, reporting in public or using forums on Facebook to try to get sources or Facebook communities tell you and to share information. That those are some interesting techniques. I actually just used that kind of technique in the last week as this conflict of Ukraine was emerging. You know, we're this small outlet with just a few full-time employees at Religion Unplugged, but we have a pretty large network around the world. So I just put up on Facebook a call for people to go to Ukrainian houses of worship anywhere in the world and to let us know what you're seeing and hearing. And sure enough, I got some feeds from Africa, from Nairobi. I got feeds from Oklahoma. We got a whole standalone story from a Ukrainian Orthodox church in Oklahoma. I went to one in New Jersey. Another of our team members went to one in Boston, and we had a few other feeds, New York. And so, and it was really cool because 100 people started engaging and discussing, and friends of mine who I didn't know were Ukrainian backgrounds are talking about their experience. So we were learning stuff in that conversation. And then today, when we had a story we put out, we shared it back to those communities. And so I think that's kind of what it looks like, you know, in terms of listening to your audience. But there's other layers, and that's what I'm happy to show you a little more of. There's other layers where I think the news industry has had a harder time listening to its audiences, and that's what I'm trying to address with my own entrepreneurship right now with a company and a product. Let me know if you want to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'd like to. Does anybody else have any questions, any advice that they'd like? If not, I think we can go ahead.
Okay, cool. All right, we can come back to this if people want to pitch an idea. We could bounce it around later. So I'm just going to grab a different slide set here to share. Okay. Oh, whoops. Of course, this is our website. I guess I'll start there, even though I grabbed the wrong window. So here's our website, and you know, you see some press here, our partners, details on how to integrate our product. It's the size of a tweet. The code is the size of a tweet. We have our team. And here, I'll show you what the product is. shoot, this is, okay. Okay, so here's a story, the story I just mentioned. And let's say you spot an error, factual error. So our tech, oh, it's a long story, sorry. Our tech embedded that code the size of a tweet embeds the bottom of every single article a button alongside these social share buttons where people can request a correction. The reader can give you feedback. And so this could be typographical, factual, contextual, or bias. And I think many of you realize, like a lot of readers say that they're biased, that media is biased these days. And so what was the error? It says you misspelled Ukraine on one reference. Should be not. Okay. Then I leave my name and an email address. Leave a phone number, and you can leave how it should be reworded, and you could put a link in here if you have one to back up your request. So you're having the reader structure information and save time for the newsroom. And then you hit the create correction request, and that's created. And what happens at that point is the reader automatically gets an email from your brand saying, thank you for being in touch with us. We'll look into this and be back to you as soon as we can. And then the news outlet gets, on my platform here, I'll get an immediate email or Slack, if I so choose, Slack message saying, hey, a request has arrived, please log in and deal with it. So then I go here to our dashboard, I log into, oh boy. This browser, I don't have my passwords saved. Let me see if I have it on my other one. Okay. Okay, we'll try this. Okay, but good, thank God. All right, so the dashboard looks like this. We have some data analytics here, and you will see, okay. Someone made this request, and so I log in, and let's just say that quickly, oh yes, they caught a typo. I recognize that. All the details are here, my contact info if I need to call them. So this is created kind of like customer service software, where I create a case, I save that case, I'm going to accept this one. So we've got built-in communication tools, so it saves you time because it grabs the person's name, the article name, and if I'm going to accept it, it says, yes, we looked into this, we worked with the author, you could edit that sentence, we fixed that story, thanks for your ongoing support. And it thanks the person, tells them to follow you on Twitter, we save it, we send it, and so it professionally manages this kind of reader feedback. And you could do it at scale. If I got 10 emails, if I have a lot of traffic on an article or a site, and I got 10 people telling me the same error or feedback, I can write to all of them at the same time with one note, one carefully worded note. And okay, so so that's the product in short. There's more details, and I'm happy to tell you more of the tech behind it and stuff. We've got about, like I said, 20 newsrooms that are using that tool. So what I want to show you now is kind of how we develop that product and company and how we tell the story of it. Let's see. My slides had I think my slides closed. I just have to reopen my.
No worries.
my slides. Yep, my keynote just crashed, so let me reopen it. Okay, we're getting somewhere now. Okay, here we go. All right, so I've got different decks. When you have a company and a product, you have different, keynote or PowerPoint decks. So I have one deck that I go through if I'm talking to possible investors, another deck that I go through if I'm talking to students or audiences about corrections as a key to reader trust. So this, I'm going to go with you through the concept. So, and it relates to the question that Devin asked, which is, we know that trust in media is at a historic low, especially for Republican or conservative audiences when surveyed. And that's really interesting. But in general, there's attacks on media, as you all know too. So how do we deal with this issue of reader trust? And it gets back to that question: how do we listen to audiences? And when is it maybe, sometimes you can't listen to all audiences all the time. So what are better ways to listen to audiences? So our company is called Vet News. Actually, the parent company is Vet Inc. Vet is a Swedish word that means savvy. So our interest is to make citizens more savvy about the news they read. And I like the word savvy because, sometimes I hear the word media literacy. But to me, that kind of implies someone is literate or illiterate. And I think it's a little, off-putting. Whereas I think a lot of us are literate and semi-literate, or, but really it's about all of us trying to become more savvy in an age where journalism is arriving to us on phones in so many different ways, so many different platforms. So our company's mission is to help citizens become more savvy about the news they read and help publishers become more transparent with the public in ways that help their bottom line. And so we built this centralized corrections tool for publishers. We call it CX. And so as we talked about, the trust in media is at an all-time low, and it's hard for news outlets. As we saw that slide earlier, people are being laid off all the time in the news industry, or at least in the last 10, 20 years. And so it's theoretically more difficult and labor intensive to manage reader trust and to fix errors when we have fewer copy editors. So one dynamic here is that we journalists sometimes, see our work differently than the public does. So 94.3% of journalists in this survey by News Collab and Center for Media Engagement said they're fair in their reporting, their organization is fair. And these are local news organizations, whereas only 17.8% of the public said so. So there's a real disconnect there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this poll by Gallup and others have shown that independence, has gone down a little bit in trust, but it's really the Republicans in particular, we see a real decline in trust in media. I wrote this piece on Pointer. I've done a couple pieces for them on the zone of trust and corrections. And I cited the study from University of Virginia that showed the distrust in media isn't singular, it's part of the broader distrust in institutions, including the trust in government, business is much lower. So this is, more concerning that Americans have problems trusting institutions. And I believe that corrections are a key place that we can and should focus, because it's a place where we can regain trust. And I believe that because I've seen Pew Research data showing that 68% of Americans say they lack confidence in news organizations' willingness to admit when they made a mistake. A Knight Foundation report in 2018 showed 90% of citizens said their trust in news orgs depend on that organization's commitment to accuracy and their willingness to openly correct mistakes. Okay, and then a follow-on study in 2020 by Knight and Gallup showed that, Americans, they want news media to correct mistakes, but they also say that it's framing of stories that they care about. And I think, that contribute to the partisan divide. So basically bias and context are important to them in addition to facts, correcting those mistakes. And we work with Trusting News, that's one of our partners. And they have, see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 zones of ethical decision making for news outlets, and corrections and accuracy are one of their key zones. So that's one reason we work together, is to help in the zone. The thing that Peter, my co-founder, and I discovered when we were getting into this space was that the process when a reader spots a mistake and tries to connect with a publisher, it used to be, there was a way to do that in the print era. The publisher would just, print, here's a phone number, email, way to contact us if we made a mistake. And people would call the phone number or send a letter or whatever, send an email. And often the person wasn't thanked that well or acknowledged. Sometimes the request would get lost in the newsroom. In general, though, a reporter would, or editor would speak to the person, double check the information, write up a correction. It would go up and down, around the newsroom, up and down from different editors, and hopefully appear in the paper the next day or within the week or something. And hopefully those readers saw that error. As clunky as that was, it did help the public to trust the news media. There was an accountability there. And our observation was that that process has not translated well in the digital age. And now you might get correction requests from tweets, comments, phone calls, etc. And there must be a better way, a simpler way to do this. And so here's a few tips in terms of listening to audience around corrections, errors, bias, feedback stuff. A key thing news entrepreneurs should, or any editors should think about, is let readers know how they can offer feedback. So explain it in your print product, explain it on your website, on your about page and your contact page. Explain it at the bottom of each article, which is what our tool does. Explain how your corrections process works, not just how to contact you. And then try to embed transparency throughout your journalism and publication is our advice. Another principle here is respond to readers quickly, as soon as possible. Acknowledge their feedback, thank them for their feedback, manage their expectations, and in so doing, while you're doing that, promote civility and respect in this interaction, because that helps you develop loyalty and relationship with your audience. And when I think of great companies that I love, that they often do this kind of thing with their customers somehow. Third principle, follow up with readers. So once you go investigate the person's feedback, thank them with a follow-up communication, show them where you published the correction if you published it. And if you decline to make the correction, let them know why. And if the reader was just sharing thoughts, thank them for that. And let them know I didn't see anything I needed to correct, but thank you for your thoughts. And these kinds of interactions build loyalty. They engage more followers, and I hope over time help news outlets gain more subscribers and be able to charge more for their advertising. So those latter two steps are things that we want to test down the road. And then finally, our tool doesn't publish the correction. We still leave that for the journalist to do. And I've been working with Trusting News on the Pluralism Network they have to figure out what are best practices for publishing corrections. And one, making sure the wording's correct, keeping it short, concise, and clear, putting it on the print and the website. We're still sorting out. I need to go read some final elements of their work on this. Should you put it at the top or the bottom, noting the article was updated, but basically put it online. At my site, we don't do, if there was just a simple missing letter, we don't usually run a correction for that, but anything more substantive than that, we try to note the article has been corrected, and here's what it was corrected.
Sorry.
Finally, yeah.
We do have a question from Amin here in the chat.
Oh, good.
What are the most pernicious problems in journalism via journalism entrepreneurs and the most disconnected readers, or where you see the least readership?
I think the most pernicious are what we call confirmation bias. I mean, and that is we all have. Jonathan Haidt did a great work on, in his book The Righteous Mind, that we all have our own deeply held beliefs and ideologies, and I think especially in the current era, the confirmation bias is such that we want the media to confirm our own deeply held beliefs. And so I think difficult audiences are those who are just so unwilling to accept data or facts that you may be reporting because they might contradict one's belief. I mean, I think we need to welcome readers who have good data that may contradict the newsroom's belief, right? But conversely, how do we cross the bridges when people refuse to accept facts that are very great context and fully reported and all that? I think those are the most difficult. And sometimes those types turn into trolls. Our tool has built-in features. If someone is spamming or being abusive or troll-like, there's ways you can just report them to spam, don't have to respond. And we also have CAPTCHA technology built in. And look, this is a great question. I mean, because my view is comments were this great hope for so many news outlets, for places places where people could have discussion about the news. And unfortunately, they've turned into cesspools typically of people screaming at each other, being nasty to one another, and that actually hurts news outlets' brands. So I've encountered quite a few newsrooms who've just turned off comments completely because of that. There are some startups like Open Web and Coral Project that are trying to improve the comment ecosystem and maybe monetize it. I wish them well. I hope it works. But I think our tool is another kind of answer that can work on sites with or without comments. We have comments on my site and our tool, but some newsrooms choose not to have comments and just use our tool because they'd rather have useful feedback from audiences, and they can manage the trolls internally rather than letting them run wild on comments and having to moderate all those comments. So I welcome more questions. Keep popping them in the chat there as we go along or at the end. Basically, I advise final step for publishers is let your readers know when you publish the correction. Can you send an alert and tweet using professional language if it's a major correction? Thank readers personally who helped you spot typos, fact errors, missing context, or issues of bias. So basically, crowdsourcing your accuracy. I think having an attitude increasing where it's not just us in the ivory tower doing journalism that know everything and have all the right information, but that we're good at it. We do try to have the right information, and we often do, but that we welcome our audience to crowdsource and help us in that process. It's almost like how Wikipedia functions, but on news, and it's not letting the audience be able to edit. You, the editor, still looks and edits their feedback. But I think this is kind of the future, and I think to a much more helpful type of internet, a garden that has not weeds growing up everywhere, but an internet garden that's weeded and clean and fun for everybody to be part of. So yeah, what do we build? I showed you our CMS tool. It's one that makes it easier for publishers to manage corrections requests in a centralized dashboard. It facilitates interaction with readers who make those requests. I already showed you the tool on our site, but it works on the mobile web as well. We can install it anywhere, including on CompuServe. We've installed our 20 clients are using all kinds of different CMS platforms. And we've been developing partnerships. And so again, back to that one of those early slides, in entrepreneurship, we've learned it's fun and it's awesome to work with partners. So RTDNA is a partner. News Leaders Association is another partner. Here's some of our others logos, some state press associations. So we want to keep working with them, making our tool available to their members. And by the way, if any of you are working at newsrooms and are interested in our tool, we would offer a discount if you're members of any of these, and also MVJ we would see as a partner. We could talk more about that partnership or potential partnership, but please let us know if you're interested in using this kind of tool. As I said, we're in about 20 publications. Our button is on the bottom of last I checked, about 770,000 articles, certainly more by now, maybe a million. And this was our team last spring. We had some MBA interns, et cetera. We're hiring a new intern, so I got to update our slides here. And what are we trying to do? We're trying to build a new infrastructure for trust online, especially for news outlets. Although our tool could work for trade publications, corporate publishers, anybody who's publishing something on the internet and wants feedback to maintain accuracy, we could install our tool for them. So that's really the product I'm working on. We want to be as helpful as we can to the publishing industry. And unless there's more questions, I'll just tell you one other thing. Where we're at now, we're trying to we got a grant to build that tool and to test it from Knight Foundation. And I know MVJ is another Knight Foundation grantee. So we're really super happy with that support. We were in an accelerator NYC Media Lab 2019 that helped get us going. And we're in an accelerator starting in a couple of weeks in Silicon Valley. The accelerator is called the Batchery. And so we're excited about that, which hopefully will help us do some of the hard analytical work, updating our decks and being ready to meet with VC firms and raise our next round of capital, hopefully to make a full-time hire for sales, to make product upgrades, and to keep expanding this tool and its usefulness to the journalism industry. We're part of this I feel it's like a small realm of tech called news tech. And I really hope to see that part of tech keep growing. I really hope smart engineers, developers, computer scientists think about, building products with journalists to help this media ecology and news industry. So that's what I have for you guys, and I welcome any questions or if anybody wants to pitch their startup ideas. Oh, I just got a note saying we've only seen the first slide. Was that true? You didn't see the rest of my slides? I think, Devin,
I think you made it on the first slide. That's
what? I was stuck on the first slide the whole time?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were going through it instead of using the slides.
Oh, I'm so sorry. No, I had these awesome slides. Oh, interesting. Here, I'm not going to go through this again, but I'm just curious about what happened right there. Okay. Now you can see the first slide, right, Devin?
Yes.
Now, whoops, okay. Let me go back. Okay, you can see the first slide. Now, did it advance?
It did not. It's sitting on corrections as a key.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I don't know what's wrong, but that's good for me to know. Obviously, I just got some insights here. So if now you can see first slide, second slide, third slide.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. So I'll just kind of click through these. You can see what you guys missed. I had some animations on one of them. Maybe that's what the problem was, is you didn't get to see the animation might have clogged the screen share or something. So sorry.
No, it's okay. I know Zoom has issues of its own sometimes.
So yeah, these are the different tips I walked you through, and some of these are helpful maybe to see, so you can kind of see how startups tell their story. Partner slide here with some logos, showing some traction details, and here's our team, and yeah, logo and stuff like that. Okay.
So I know you mentioned at the very beginning of this that you have two different sets of slides. Is that a good practice for entrepreneurs as they go out and they try to spread the word or find funders and such?
Yeah, I mean, I think as an entrepreneur, you have to learn to tell your story, and so you'll be in many formats where you might have to tell it in the form of text, applying to to an incubator or accelerator. often you have to upload a deck like this or a VC deck, and then you have to like answer essay questions and put the logo in and LinkedIn profiles. And so I feel like, excuse me, you have a tight story, and I can tell my company's story in 30 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, and 2 hours, and so depending on what the audience is looking for. And yes, I have 4 or 5 different types of decks. The main two I'd say though are, I have a deck for investors and a deck for maybe journalism communities where we have like longer period of time like this to talk about the concept of reader trust and to kind of tell you about the company and product in the course of talking about these issues of trust. Whereas if I was talking to VCs, I wouldn't be showing like Gallup polls typically, or talking about how to do corrections, because they're just not interested in that. They really want to know more of what's the big problem and what's the tech solution, and and how's it being adopted and how's it going to make money. So that's what I mean. Yeah, definitely. I mean, same. Yeah. And it's being willing to, have your core story about your product, your team, etc., but to be able to present it in so many different formats. And it's kind of fun learning how to do that, being forced to do that.
Okay, thank you for answering that. I mean, you can talk if you would like to. I've activated the mic feature, so you should be able to if you'd like.
Okay, there's like some there's some sound. I don't know if you can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So sorry, I can't turn off. I'm Jim. Yeah, I don't think I can turn on. Yeah, so I'd like to pitch like 3 ideas. So the first one is called New Yorker, focus on serving like newcomers to New York, or like New American, focus on immigrant community, but serving them in English, or Gen Ed, focus on teenagers. And I'm wondering like what's your idea about each one? Or which one do you think would be the first domino, or the easiest to tackle?
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, cool. So let's work this through a little bit. All right, so I think the first mission is to figure out, if you're going to launch one of these 3, which one you're most passionate about, and which one might have sort of a competitive advantage for you to launch, and also a market or audience. So if you could tell us a little bit more. I think I heard you say a New Yorker for immigrant communities. I could have misheard that.
It's in the chat. It's in the chat.
Oh, here we go. 3 ideas. A New Yorker focused on serving newcomers to New York. Okay, I see. And then New American focused on immigrant communities, or Gen Ed focused on teenagers. Okay. Well, let's see here. From an audience standpoint, which one has the biggest audience? I don't know how many new people come to New York every year. New American is definitely a bigger audience. Teenagers is also a big audience. The hard thing about one for teenagers, just thinking, we're thinking kind of big, broad stuff right now in terms of audience. I think the hard thing for any new startup focused on teenagers is that audience is always aging out. Like every few years, I feel like I'm dealing with a new generation of college students, and they're quite different in their mindsets and their trends, their lingo, fashion. And so it's amazing when you have brands like Teen Vogue or others that seem to last over quite a few decades. I find that market segment to be difficult. So of all these 3, just thinking in those big broad categories, I probably would vote for New American, focused on immigrant communities. And from there, I don't know if you agree with that assessment, but then there's a question of, let me ask you a question back. How would you, assuming you're going to launch that one, New American, how would you do initial research on like what features to include, what kinds of journalism to offer?
So I would focus on on people who are already speaking English, like I would aim for so basically for people who are either here like at least a year or more, and or like just like their children who actually do most of the translating. So yeah, find those people and find out what are the things that they're mostly hungry for, what do they want to know the most, and then kind of serve them that. Sorry, do you mind saying the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, I think what you start doing there is defining the audience a little more and doing a nice job of that. And so which you did by saying, already speaking English, either when, various ways. And then, okay, so the next step of research, you also said you would try to figure out what kind of journalism they wanted or needed. That's key. And maybe even thinking what would they want or need so much that they might be willing to pay for. And, I'm sure new Americans have a lot of things they're paying for and getting used to in a new country, a new context. So what could be so valuable to them that you could provide, I think is a really good question to think about for the subscribers. Or is it, and who's paying? Is it those subscribers, or are they engaging with your app or your site or social media or your content basically, and someone else is sponsoring it? It's, I think, always better if the client or customer themselves is willing to pay. So I think that's a question, if I were you, I'd try to wrestle with then. And then also, here's another question for you. Delivery, distribution. Would you launch a classic website and then a mobile app, which is costly to build, or and then all the social channels, or would you do a Substack newsletter and just start this thing as a weekly email, and where people could either donate to or subscribe to for $5 a month, and you just start to build the audience with Substack email? Or do you think that community likes to talk and listen, and maybe a Clubhouse or these other Twitter or Facebook audio platforms is a better way to try this? Any
Yeah,
thoughts?
like I'm very seduced by the idea that Elon Musk idea of starting like with the most with the easiest, or like the one who are the richest, kind of starting like with very niche market, like maybe people who already read email and are like very like they're coming here like on their B1 visa, like just to work, like they are highly like so I see immigrants like in different categories. There's people who kind of come here legally. There are people who come here like through the lottery visa, green card. There are people who come here like through family, either marriage or family sponsorship. And there's people who come through their B1 visas, and then there are the students. So I don't know which one of them will be like I'm like wrestling between either the one who come with B1 visa or already speak English and have high paying jobs, or between like students who are thinking about staying here longer. So but probably like maybe B1 visas, and just like start with a Substack email of just like giving them like the lowdown, like, but not like every day or every week, but maybe every 2 weeks or every, like something like that, like of, and having something like that. I'm thinking about more like kind of, even if I serve them something for free, like freemium, like serve them something for free, but then like if they're thinking about buying like a house, like there's like like I sell them like a booklet or something, everything about mortgages, about houses, about like how things work here, or like if they want to think about education for their children, like kind of like do things of that sort, like different publications that go with what they have to do, or like something about American diet, like I don't know, just like kind of yeah.
Yeah, I like your thinking here. I agree that if I was in your shoes, I think a Substack newsletter is a great way to start this, because it's free. probably a Substack newsletter and a Twitter feed, and just see what you can build an audience on those two. And I don't know, when you were talking, sort of my brain was thinking, I bet you could find with that kind of a Substack newsletter and the New American or something, once a week, maybe you could find other writers like once a week. There's got to be a lawyer or a law firm somewhere that specializes in helping New Americans. And a lot of lawyers can write pretty well. There's got to be someone who would love to write a once a month column that goes over legal details in an entertaining way for New Americans. And that's like, so I pay $5 a month. I get one monthly legal column from so-and-so lawyer. Maybe there's another, like you say, like cooking or food or humor type of thing once a month. Maybe there's once a month a story from you or someone who writes a profile of an interesting or inspirational New American, which I think people want that too. But maybe not too much. They want sort of news they can use as well as inspiring stories. I mean, and I have to say, like, this is kind of getting me excited to the point where I'm like, oh man, even people who've been in America their whole lives, some of them might want to sign up to read this kind of thing. So yeah, I think starting simply with 4 pieces of content a month is a really cool way for you to try to build an audience, test the market, and continue to adapt. Maybe you discover, oh, the lawyer's post or this real estate advisor's post, or okay, I'd say great columns, like you said, real estate, someone who can advise you on renting, on buying, on sort of how to get on that ladder of real estate in America. Another one, personal finance columnist for New Americans. So, I mean, if you had a legal columnist, a personal finance columnist, a real estate columnist, and then sort of a classic journalist who did a story a month or inspirational story a month, that's a pretty nice offering of useful journalism, inspirational journalism. And what's cool is then you could try to see which of those columnists or columns are getting the most traffic, and that might influence what you say. You do all that before you launch a website. That influences what kind of website or app you might launch. So this is a really good case study, I think. I mean, and I think, and I think of these 3 topics, I think New American is also the one that stands out to me in terms of social good or being, potentially interesting to, I don't know, foundations or funders of different kinds, Open Society, or I don't know, MacArthur or New America Foundation. So are you pretty serious about this?
Yes. I pitched it to the editors at the Wall Street Journal to write a column, and then I thought maybe I should pick it for myself first, get something out of it before I just had it. Before I pitch again for them to be a columnist for the Wall Street Journal. So I'm quite serious.
Yeah.
I already have the Twitter account, New American. But I haven't written anything there yet.
Yeah. And are you working in news now already? Or do you have a job that would allow you to launch this on your own?
Yes, I'm not working in the news, so I'm coming to journalism like mostly as a Luddite. Like I like a while ago a while ago, like I wrote for school newspaper, but I have not. I'm coming to this like as a new person, but I do have time. I'm just wondering what are the first things that I need to knock out one after the other. I'm always thinking about the dominoes. Like what's the first step? What's the second step of getting this through?
Yeah. Well, I like the way we're doing the conversation. You're processing like a lot of the good questions there, and you just keep going with it. Now I'm trying to think of resources for you. I mean, one that came to my mind is City University of New York, or CUNY, Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism. They have, Jeff Jarvis works there, Jeremy Kaplan. They have a pretty good program over the years on entrepreneurial journalism, whether you go for like the full 18-month program, but I think they also have kind of a standalone entrepreneurial journalism boot camp kind of thing that you could go through, and they would help you kind of develop and launch this kind of product, including try to maybe put you in touch with people who could help you. So that's something I would, if I was in your shoes, I would definitely think about. There may be some other, I don't know if you're located in New York or if you're in another city, but there are some other graduates.
New York.
You're in New York. So I would definitely go talk to Jeremy Kaplan and Jeff Jarvis and take a look at what they're doing. Has that come up at all in any of the other sessions this week, that program they run there? I'm going to try to find a link to post it for you. Let's see, here we go. Entrepreneurial Journalism Creators Program. I'll just drop this in the chat. And it's part of the Tau Knight Center there for entrepreneurial journalism. And they have, some of these schools, like I tell people, if you're thinking of grad school, especially in New York, I mean, Columbia, CUNY, and NYU are all really good graduate programs. And they you might see the price tag, but they may have scholarships. You don't know until you apply. And all of them have something with entrepreneurship, but I think, I just posted it here. I think CUNY is really focused on entrepreneurship. So definitely go check them out, maybe go take a look at school, go visit admissions, etc. Because I think I do think they're one of the leaders in this category.
I'm just resending them in the chat.
Okay. Great. Well, it's fun. We got sort of a mini pitch going on here from Amin. I'm really glad you got to do that.
Awesome. Joseph, do you have anything, any pitches or any advice you'd like to seek? Okay, well, if nobody else has any questions or any other advice they'd like, believe we will wrap it up here. Thank you so much for being with us, Professor Glatter. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And thank you to everybody who attended. It's been a great workshop over the past 3 days, and we had a great professor to close it out. So,
Thanks,
right.
Devin.
Thank you. Have
Bye
a
now.
good night, everybody.